Hello, this is Britjet's PSX Tips, the first of 3 videos on non-precision approaches. This one is a generic look at beacon tracking using the RMI needles to establish where we are in a procedure and to navigate without using a map display. Now, when I started in aviation, things were a little different. We didn't have all this wonderful inertial navigation, GPS, map displays and so on. What we had was the basic needle navigation pointing to VORs and NDBs, such as the one which is an option on PSX. The equipment there will allow you to fly a SID and a STAR to any airfield as long as it's not an RNAV procedure which uses coordinates. Now, I spent many hours in a link trainer like the one on the left there, just learning these skills, and those skills will actually come in very handy to help you to fly non-precision approaches and indeed SIDs. I've chosen to fly at Echo Bravo Oscar Sierra Ostend. We're going to use PSX just as an airborne platform to follow the needles around. And I'm just interested in 2 beacons there. One is the Kilo Oscar Kilo, which is a VOR, and the other one is the actual beacon used for the procedure, which is called the Oscar November Oscar radials. Now, here's a radial map. You'll be very familiar with this. A radial is, in our case, a magnetic bearing from a particular beacon. It could be a VOR, it could be an NDB. I'm sure you're very happy with this sort of map display, so I'm going to give you a little test now. I'm going to show you a picture of the nav display and see how quickly you can tell me what's our radial from the Oscar November Oscar. What's our radial from the Kilo Oscar Kilo? Now, if you've got a value of 265 from the Oscar November Oscar and a value of 049 from the Kilo Oscar Kilo, then you're on the right track. But if you had to think about it, then there may be something in this video for you, in particular with regard to tracking. To track away on a radial, think of rubber bands. Imagine a rubber band between the track line and the tail of the needle, and just drag it using your track line to the required radial. Notice this is the track line, not the heading. The track is actually where the aircraft's going, which is what you're interested in. So here I've got a situation where the heading and the track, of course, now is well to the right of the tail of the needle, and if I let the aircraft move, you should see that we are successfully pulling that tail of the needle towards our track line. And really, you're just going to leave it like that until it comes to the radial that you want. So say, for example, I wanted to turn onto a radial of 275. I would, as I'm approaching 275, set my heading to about that. Here we go. And ensure that my track line, which is what is pulling the needle about, goes to where I want it. To track towards a beacon, we use the head of the needle, and think of the head of the needle as being a football. If you want the football to go onto the inbound course that you require, then use the track line as though it was your foot. So here, imagine we wanted to get our inbound course and therefore our football on 210. That means I've got to touch the right hand side of the ball to get it over there. With my track line, which is on the right hand side, that should work. Moving then, and as we approach the beacon, you'll notice the needle is falling, it's going down. If you've got this right, the needle should always fall. If it's going up, then you've been turning in the wrong direction. The rule that people use is to say needle more, steer more, needle less, steer less. So at the moment the needle is more than 210 degrees, so we steer more. Now as we come on to 210, we need to anticipate to make sure we don't turn through. How much lead angle, which is what it's called, you use depends on how close you are to the beacon, how fast you're flying, and so on. I'm just going to move us on a little faster here, and when we get to 215 we'll turn onto a heading to track us for 210. Nearly there. That's 215. Okay, heading coming round. I'm pressing heading cell. The aircraft is turning. And if you've done it right, the aircraft will turn straight onto the heading. So now you've got to get your track line exactly on the course that you want. So actually I've got very little drift here. And as I turn on to 210, we're pretty good. Now as I come inbound, I'm still playing football. The needle is moving to the right, so I move my track line to the right to kick it back in, if that makes sense. There I go. I'm watching my track line. Remember, it's not the heading, it's where the track goes. About there, I think. Coming back in. I'm coming quite close to the beacon now. So as you get close, of course, these changes will have to be smaller and smaller. So that's tracking towards. Imagine it's a football. Okay, to illustrate these points then, just to finish, I'm going to fly the horizontal pattern here, which is to the Delta Delta, fly overhead, establish on 078 to the Oscar November Oscar, and then fly that little teardrop inbound. And I am on the radial, if you look at the tail of the needle here, of about 175 from the Delta Delta, so I'm to the south of the beacon, and I just want to track straight over the top. So what I'm going to do is get rid of the center, so I've got a nice clear picture on the arc, and I want to get my track line over the top of the blue pointer, so left a little bit, maybe a couple of degrees, to keep my bearing constant. And of course a non-directional beacon such as this will wave around a little bit. You just got to get yourself a good average. And we seem to be about there. If I go back to center now, you'll see that my number 1 needle is falling down to 078, so I must be nearly overhead. As I go overhead, I'm going to just navigate to my number 1 needle, and you can see that the number 2 needle is falling, so I'm going to turn onto that 078, and because I've used a little bit going over the top, I'm going to give it a little bit more than 078, probably about 090 or so, and let the wind from the north blow me on. So I don't need my number 2 needle anymore, it's just confusing me, so I'm going to switch it off, and I'm just going to go to the arc to concentrate on being 078. So I'm now playing football, and I'm trying to get my number 1 needle on 078. Not easy to do through the autopilot because there's quite a lot of lag there. Takes a little while for the aircraft to respond. Playing football then with the needle. Kicking it in from the right now. Starting to move. Of course I'm quite close to the beacon, so any changes I make have to be small ones. And when I get over the top of the beacon, I'm going to go onto 106. Actually, we're looking pretty good now. We must be getting very close, I think. ADF needles will wander around a little bit like this. So I'm playing football with my track line there. The aim is to keep the tracking within about 5 degrees. Coming back nicely. Quite a lot of drift on here. I've deliberately put on about 25 knots across. And if I get my track line right over 078, that's going to be pretty close. We're getting close to the beacon now. And it's falling away to the right, which makes me think we're getting very close. There it goes over the top. So I'm turning now onto 106 and a little bit more because my turn has gone over the top. And now I'm tracking away from the needle, so I'm now using rubber band. Always takes a while for the needles to settle down, probably at least 30 seconds really. So you have to be... There's a certain amount of guesswork in this. The timing from over the top of a turn like this would be 1 minute 15 seconds typically. So I've started that, and then you'd take a little bit off for the tailwind. So rubber band in use here to get to 106. That's not bad, is it? I could get good at this, you know. And if you were flying a non-precision approach here, you'd typically be configuring the aeroplane with about 10 degrees of flap. Just dragging the needle onto 106. You want to be within about 5 degrees of track in order to make a descent. So I think we're looking pretty good there. You see, the whole thing can be quite a dynamic situation if you're close to the beacon like this. Right, so allowing for wind, that's my timing up. I'm going to turn back in, and the idea is to establish so that I will attack 258 inbound. So it probably won't be a very long leg, it might even be a straight turn. So I'm going to give myself a heading of about 270 initially. I'll go to map center and we'll see what's happening with the needle. Now in a turn the needles will do rather strange things, so don't panic if you see something like this happening. It does sort itself out eventually. And it seems to be getting settled now, so I'm going to give myself about that, and I'm now playing football again, remembering we're using the track line here. Looking for 258, and I want to be within 5 degrees. So that's football okay. I'm kicking it from the right. The needle will drop, and also I've got quite a lot of drift there, so that's good. Taking a little longer to drop down than I would have expected, but I'm not going to panic. And as we approach our inbound course, a little bit of lead angle and allowing for drift to turn the track line over the top of 258. I'm going to go for that. We're getting close to the beacon. You'd be configuring the aircraft now, getting the gear down, the flaps down, all that good stuff. Playing football. Small corrections. And as we come over the top, the important thing is to turn onto a sensible heading. So it would be the inbound course of 258 plus whatever drift we thought we needed. Waving around all over the place. Here we go, it's starting over the top now. You can see the needle is moving regardless really of whatever I do. So as we go over the top, I've just passed very slightly to the south of it, There it goes. I'd stop my stopwatch, do all that other good stuff, and turn onto a sensible heading, which would be about, I don't know, what have we got, 10 degrees of drift? 268 probably. And now we are using the tail of the needle again. Leave it for about 30 seconds for the needle to settle down. We'd now be looking for our runway, doing our inbound timing, and in fact that's looking quite nice on the tracking. Trying to drag the tail of the needle to where I want it. Just wander about a bit here. That's looking quite nice. And if I just freeze the sim here for a moment, so there's the runway. And I think you'll agree that even just using basic needle navigation, we've managed to get the aircraft very nicely lined up with the runway.